We are moving on to Marhaennia English, and Nia is going to be presenting a session today on women, remittances, and economic development, the case of overseas Filipina workers. And Nia is a senior in the honors program at Hood College. She is a major in global studies and has a minor in women and gender studies. So with that, I will hand it over to Nia to present.
Thank you, Dr. Littlefield. Okay, so let me share screen. Okay, can everyone see my presentation? All right, so good afternoon, everybody. I will be presenting on women, remittance, and economic development, the case of female overseas Filipino workers. So, let's see. My thesis is on women empowerment and its significance in achieving gender equality and increasing the capabilities of female migrant workers from the Philippines, whose remittance contribute to the Philippines' economic growth and development. The Philippines is the second largest archipelagic nation in Southeast Asia. And in 2018, the population is about 106.7 million. The GDP is about 346 billion, with GDP growth that year about 6%, unemployment rate about 5%, and the population lived below poverty line is about 16%. The country's Gini coefficient is 0.426, and it's in the medium scale, and then the Human Development Index is 0.711. Which put them in the high scale, and ranking is 111 out of 189 countries. So Gini index measure income distribution across the population. So Gini index measure economic inequality. So Gini index is from 0 to 1. So the higher the number reflects the greater the inequality. So that being said, the Philippines score 0.26 makes them in the medium scale, which is they're doing relatively pretty well. And Human Development Index, as the name itself, measure human development using three key elements: health, and then education, and then standard of living. The Philippines has been doing relatively well in Human Development Index, and they put them constantly in the high rank for the past decade. And for because because my paper is about female migrant workers, so I'm including the Global Gender Gap Report of the Philippines. For this matter, the Philippines also has been doing relatively well because the Philippines has one of the smallest rate of gender disparity in the world. In the past decade, if you see from 2006 to 2017, they've been constantly staying in the top 10. So which means the Philippines is together with the OECD countries, the Nordics, Scandinavians, they have this smaller rate of gender disparity. However, in 2020, the Philippines ranking declined, and according to the Philippine Commission of Women, the ranking declined because political empowerment declined. So women participation in the cabinet declined about 25% to 10% between 2017 and 2019. And according to the Philippine Commission of Women, the decline is attributed to the prevailing patriarchal norms and values, and also gender stereotype. And arguably, the political system and electoral system also contribute to the decline of political empowerment of the women in the Philippines. For instance, the electoral system, which winner takes all, and then the cost of running as a candidate It's very expensive, so the women tend to have less contribution, which hinder them from participating. And furthermore, the proportional system of representation often put the women's candidate in the bottom of the list. So that statement coming from the Philippine Commission of Women. So unfortunately, in the 2020, they declined ranking into the 16th from the 8th of the previous year. When it comes to educational attainment, the Philippine educational system is similar to the US. It's a primary education K to 12, which is compulsory. And then according to the data that I gathered, girls outnumber boys in primary education and even higher education, enrollment and graduation. And literacy rate, female is higher than males. And if you see here, from the age 10 to 24, from the primary to the higher education, the female in the lighter purple, they are higher, 84% compared to 77.7, for instance. And then the high school and the higher education, even female is higher. I think I find it is fascinating, considering that the Philippines is an emerging economy. However, what is special about the Philippines is also because the American occupied the Philippines for almost 50 years. So English is the language of delivery in school and in many institutions, and English has become the second official language of the Philippines. Now for female migrant worker, before the 1980s, migrant worker usually predominantly male, and the Philippines is the top 10 sending countries for migrant worker in the world. And overseas Filipino workers since 1980, predominantly female. So female makeup in 2018 about 56%. So there's about 2.4 million migrant worker, and then 56% out of the 2.4 million are female. And 47.5% out of that 56%, they belong to the age between 25 and 34, which occupy elementary occupations. When I say elementary occupation, that means like domestic workers, caregivers, hotel and office cleaners, and some other elementary occupations. And Filipino migrant worker predominantly go to Western Asia, like the Middle East. Saudi Arabia has the largest number of the Filipino migrant worker, UAE, Qatar, and then in East Asia, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong. Southeast Asia is Singapore and Malaysia, and then Europe and United States, and a little bit in Africa. The one thing special about why I'm fascinated with the Philippines and their migrant worker is because not only that I believe for an emerging economy, their gender equality is well and progressing, and also the the aspect of women empowerment. Not only that the female receive the primary education that is compulsory at home, but they also receive empowerment on deployment. Which means migrant workers receive training from the government in countries where they are deployed. And usually these trainings are provided at the embassies and consulates of the receiving countries. So for example, there's martial art training in Saudi Arabia, consulate in Jeddah, and then there's also basic hand carving training in Madrid, Spain. And there are many other examples, but I just these two because it's relevant to the female migrant workers. And how do they contribute to the economic growth and development in the Philippines? It is through remittance, so the money that they send at home. So the remittance from migrant workers in the Philippines makes up about 10% of the GDP. So if the female makes up 56%, in 2018, they have 33.83 billion. So just by 56% is close to 20 billion alone female migrant workers contribute to the country. And how do they contribute is through household expenditure, household spending. And, I counted about 55% of those monies goes to household spending, buying furniture, buying food, everything else, education, and 8% out of it goes to investment. And this is the interesting part, is that their investment usually go to property investment. And investing in property is very common among migrant workers, not only for exclusive to the Philippines, but usually migrant workers, the signature of their work is property, either it's land or houses. So the property business, real estate in the Philippines is booming because of this remittance coming from migrant workers. And in the Philippines, property investment can be for the house, for the family, or they usually rent it to, rent the property to make, to make money out of the property. So this is my today's presentation. I have time for questions if anybody is interested. Thank you for your attention.
We do have a question that's been posted for you.
Yes.
The question says, it's often observed that colonialism can inhibit social progress in the countries being colonized. Which qualities about the Philippines do you think helps them continue to thrive in gender equity despite the history of colonization?
Yes, well, it is actually my further research about colonization and how it impacts the migrant worker. And for the case in the Philippines, my argument and my research found out that American occupation or colonization actually contribute largely to the identity of the Philippines today, which includes the migrant workers, especially the use of English language as the language of delivery in the country. Even though the migrant worker, for instance, the domestic workers, they only go up to the high school, but they have been exposed to English language from kindergarten. So they have years of English language exposure in comparison to other migrant workers from around the world. And then also the attitude of personal development, I discovered that American occupation, something good out of it is the idea of personal development coming from this 48 years of American occupation in the Philippines.
Very good. Lots of nice comments in the chat here. Nia, you're an outstanding scholar. Thank you from Professor Ross.